Welcome. I'm pleased to be with you today and have the chance to introduce our next speaker for the Empire Lectures, Tali Mendelberg. My name is Shana Gadarian. I am Assistant Professor of Political Science at Syracuse University and a proud former student of Tali's. Professor Mendelberg is the author of the award-winning book, The Race Card, Campaign Strategies, Implicit Messages, and the Norm of Equality, and co-author of the acclaimed book, The Silent Sex, Gender, Deliberation, and Institutions. She has been awarded the Erik Erikson Early Career Award for excellence and creativity in the field of political psychology, and her work has been supported by grants and fellowships from organizations such as the National Science Foundation and the University of Pennsylvania, among countless others. Her talk today, The Affluence Effect, College Socialization and Inequality, explores the idea that modern American college campuses are composed predominantly of affluent students, and how this little-known fact turns out to have big implications for the politics of income inequality. Please join me in welcoming Professor Mendelberg to the stage. There's a clicker right there.
Thank you so much, Shana. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk to you today about the affluence effect, college socialization and inequality. And I want to make sure to add that this is a joint project with a number of terrific students, including Adam Thal, Katie McCabe, Vittoria Marola, and Tanika Reshodhuri. So I'm going to start with a few fairly well-known facts. So here's a familiar Piketty and Saez income graph. And you can see that in the middle of the 20th century, the income share going to the top 10% plunged. But then, over the last few decades, it's been rising sharply, and now it's at a record level. So the top 10% are taking about 50% of national income. Here's a somewhat less well-known fact, which is coincident with this trend. We've also seen the top marginal tax rate plunge, right? It used to be quite high. This was introduced during the New Deal period, 90%. Then it plunged gradually over time, and now it's much, much lower. Now, another somewhat well-known fact is that despite taxes and transfers, inequality remains, right? So to give you a sense, before income tax and transfer is applied, this is what the income distribution looks like. So the top income is taking the lion's share of income. After taxes and transfers are applied, it's not all that different. The top is still taking a disproportionate share of income. All of which to say is we've got lots of income inequality, not big news in political science. And yet another development in political science that I'm anchoring here in is that affluent income shares rose in part because of government policy. So those first two trends that I showed you are interrelated. In fact, a recent study concludes that the rise in income polarization is due in part because of lower tax rates on high incomes. And now many of us are familiar with rising, the increase in work that shows that this federal tax policy, which is highly regressive, is in part shaped by affluent Americans, right? So we've got an increasing number of political science studies showing that policy is not a coincidence and policy is not responsive simply to macro trends. It's also shaped by affluent Americans. Now, to say that it's shaped by affluent Americans only means something if affluent Americans have preferences that diverge from the preferences of other Americans. And on which issues does that divergence happen? Well, it happens disproportionately on issues that implicate the financial interests of affluent Americans. So, for example, cutting the top marginal tax rate, cutting the inheritance tax, instituting a flat tax, cutting capital gains tax. There is a clear theme running through all of this, which is cutting taxes on people at the top of the income distribution. Now, this might not seem like a puzzle or a reason to conduct a research project. The reason we think it is a puzzle and a reason to conduct a research project is because the public opinion literature is very clear that actually self-interest does not automatically shape people's preferences. So if you want to know why do affluent Americans have these distinctive class-interested preferences, we can't just say it's because they obviously know what their self-interest is. The public opinion literature says that typically people form opinions based on their sense of group interest, right? So we want to know, how do affluent Americans generate a sense of their group identity as affluent? How do they come to a sense that their subjective interests are class-based affluent interests? And in addition, we know from the literature that where people get their preferences from is also values. So the question for us is, where do affluent Americans obtain or learn or activate values that are materialistic such that they tend to shift rightward on economic policy? In other words, what are the group interests and the values that shape affluent Americans' distinctive preferences away from redistributive policy? And the bumper sticker answer is that it's norms of affluence. And so here's a New Yorker cartoon where one affluent person turns to another in this very affluent setting. There's a pool, there are palm trees, they've got their Hawaiian shirts on, they're having drinks with little umbrellas in them. And so it's this kind of affluent setting. And then one turns to the other and says, meritocracy worked for my grandfather, it worked for my father, and it's working for me. So that's the bumper sticker answer, which is affluence is not just a concrete interest. It's not just an objective classification based on income. It also has to do with a sense of social norms and a kind of a totality of norms that make up an affluent culture. And affluent parents then tend to send their offspring to institutions such as colleges, institutions of higher education, where they are in turn surrounded by these norms of affluence. So I'm going to show you some evidence suggesting that today many campuses have these social norms of affluent consumption, like the scene we just saw with the pool and the drinks with the umbrellas. Nothing against umbrellas and drinks, but palm trees and affluent settings and people with very conspicuous levels of consumption. That is what a lot of students are seeing now on many campuses, and not just the elite campuses. I'll show you that in a second. So what is the problem with that? Well, what I'm going to show you is that these affluent campus environments are essentially teaching affluent students to think as affluent people, to develop political interests in line with these subjective interests as affluent, and this conservatizes students in terms of economic policy. Now, we think that affluent students are especially likely to undergo this conservatizing change during college as they're surrounded by affluence, because they themselves come from households that are affluent, right? That's what makes them affluent students by our definition. And so they're the ones who are likely to identify with this kind of group sense of affluence. So even if a lower income or middle income student attends one of these very affluent schools and is surrounded by this affluent environment, they're less likely to then identify as an affluent student, even if they intend to make a lot of money in the future, right? So the link here is identities indexed to social norms. Social norms are going to influence people based on their background, which leads to likely identity. So here's a sense of where campus affluence come from, and it's linked to the first charts that I showed you. The first charts really establish the growing income polarization in society. Well, with income polarization, what we're seeing is polarized access to college, and I'm talking about four-year degrees here specifically, and college completion specifically. The association between family income and completing college is now stronger than the association between race and completing college. That's how income polarized our society has become. And so you can see that while it's always been true, even in 1970, that the top quartile is more likely than other quartiles to send their kids through college, that's always been true, certainly since 1970, it's even more true today in 2011. So 71% of kids from the top income quartile are completing college. A disproportionate share, that was always true, it's even more true today. And if you can back out from these numbers what a campus drawing from this distribution is going to look like. A campus drawing from this distribution is going to have about half affluent students. Okay? Now you might say, Sure, but elite campuses were always really affluent, right? So they couldn't have grown more affluent. Well, that's not true. Yes, they always were pretty much affluent in 1976. In 1995, they've become still more so. Okay, so even in elite schools, Princeton, Yale, Harvard, the Ivies, the selective schools, they always had a lot of rich kids. Now they have even more. Here's what it looks like when a campus is composed predominantly of affluent students. It's not a coincidence that there's all this conspicuous consumption going on campus. This is what our students are seeing when they attend our institutions. They're seeing a lot of conspicuous consumption. So the other part of the story here is not just the collection of affluent students on college campus, it's also the collection of affluent students who greatly value making lots and lots of money. Okay, so it's the dominance of a social norm of financial gain that's going to cause this conservatizing shift. Just collecting a lot of rich students, say, during the New Deal period is not likely to have created conservative students. But collecting a lot of affluent students in a social environment that glorifies making tons of money is likely to create more economically conservative students. So our other big predictor, along with the percent affluent students on campus, is going to be the percent students on campus who say they're going to college in order to make lots of money. Here's what it looks like in my home institution, the Daily Princetonian. Here's a freshman writing, and I'll just, "Are we here to make money?" she's writing to other students, and she's recounting what happened to her the first week she showed up on campus. A series of conversation that she overheard. "Everyone's here to make money," an upperclassman, nonchalantly chowing down on a late meal quesadilla, declared to me the first Thursday of freshman week. She hasn't even been here a week. She's already exposed to the norm. Pre-meds want to make money, engineers want to make money, and of course, econ kids want to make bucket loads of money. And here's the key part of our story. A murmuring of approval from our table at Frisk Campus Center accompanied this assertion. And even though his candor was startling, I nodded along. Okay, so here's a student who herself then later says she's not interested in making lots of money necessarily. That's not her priority, but she's exposed early on to a very strong social norm in her community that values money regardless of what your major is. You know, you might want to go to med school. You'll still want to make lots of money. You might want to be an engineer. Well, you'll still want to make lots of money. So let me hand this back. So that's what we are talking about when we're talking about norms of financial gain. So to summarize, the hypotheses here are, first of all, campuses with a high affluent percentage are going to trigger affluent students' latent class interests, right? They're going to instill a sense of, we are affluent people, and being affluent means conspicuous affluent consumption. That's what we're talking about here. And this is going to conservatize especially affluent students, and especially among students who are exposed to the norms on campus and are open to absorbing those norms. So if you've got a student who often sits in the Frisk campus table, she's going to be exposed to a lot of these conversations. A student who's not socializing is not going to be listening, not exposed to the norm. So the affluence effect is going to be especially high among students who are embedded in social life on campus. And in addition, the affluence effect is going to be strongest where there's a strong social norm of financial gain, right? So where students are constantly talking about how it's really important to make a lot of money, that's where we're going to see the conservatizing effect show up. And just briefly, our data comes from the UCLA Higher Education Research Institute, which interviews freshmen across the country in many hundreds of schools. There's a beginning of college interview, and then students are re-interviewed at the end of their senior year. And because it's such a large data set from so many years, we can really home in on affluent students, which are the population we're interested in. And because these are institutionally administered surveys, there's a very nice high response rate. And we've also replicated and extended these tests with an additional data set called the College and Beyond data set. So here's an example of the kind of economic views we're explaining. So when I say people are conservatizing, they're growing more likely to disagree strongly with statements like, wealthy people should pay a larger share of taxes than they do now. And in our models, we try a variety of specifications. We've accounted for almost any confounder that you can think of, and we've been able to account for the students' freshman year starting view, right? We know what they think about taxing the wealthy before they start college because we ask them, and so we can account for that in predicting their senior year views. So here's the campus affluence effect. What you can see is that as the affluent student percentage increases at the school, students become more economically conservative in senior year, right? In schools where there's only a minority of affluent students, the typical senior is rather moderate. In schools that are predominantly affluent, the typical senior is more on the conservative side. Again, this is on wealthy people should pay a larger share of taxes than they do now. There's, of course, a thorny question about whether we've picked up a correlation. People who are attending affluent schools would have been more likely to conservatize anyway, or whether there's a real causal effect from attending a school surrounded by affluent students. We have done a lot of work to get at this question. Just to give you a flavor for what we've done, we've replicated the basic affluence effect with the college and beyond data set, where we know whether students applied to affluent schools or less affluent schools, and whether they were rejected from affluent and non-affluent schools. And we've replicated the effect among the subset who are rejected from affluent schools and could only attend non-affluent schools, comparing them to students the opposite way. So we've got students who could not select in or out of school affluence on both sides of the continuum of affluence. And we can show that attending an affluent school actually does make you more conservative, even when you couldn't select in or out of school affluence. We also find that the effect lasts 4 years past graduation. So this is not just a fly-by-night phenomenon. And we've conducted a bunch of placebo tests, so the effect only obtains on economic views, not on social views, and the effect obtains primarily on affluent students and does not obtain among students who are not likely to identify as affluent students. Now, I mentioned to you 2 mechanisms, and here's evidence for the first mechanism that it's really about social norms. It's the people who are embedded in the social life of campus who are especially likely to undergo the campus affluent effect. So attending a highly affluent campus matters especially if you've also joined a fraternity or sorority. We find similar effects if we replace fraternity sorority membership with socializing many hours a week. So it's not just being inclined a particular way which does it. It's not just, people who join these groups are different. It's not about that. It's about, are you exposed to the norm on campus? And the other mechanism I mentioned to you is, does the school have a norm of financial gain? So are most students, when asked why are they attending college, saying, I'm attending college to make bucket loads of money? In campuses where most students say that they're attending in order to make more money, that's where we really see the campus affluence effect. That's where the biggest effect really is. It's got to be highly affluent and materialistic at the same time. So, in sum, students that are attending school with an affluent student majority seem to develop more conservative views on economic policy specifically, relative to students from the same high income strata who are attending schools with few affluent students. And we've subjected these to lots and lots of tests, and they all come back fairly supportive of the basic hypothesis. I mentioned that this applies to affluent students specifically, so non-affluent students are not sensitive to the percent affluent at their school. We also find that the effect persists 4 years past graduation. We found support for 2 of our norms predictions. That is, it really seems to be about norms. If you're embedded, you absorb the norm, and if the norm is materialistic, it has more of an effect on you. I'm happy to answer questions about other mechanisms that we've tested and ruled out. So it's not about the contact with particular individuals. It's about exposure to the overall norm. Again, I'm happy to talk about that. And there's a variety of broader implications here. So we've replicated a large literature, which unfortunately has gone rather dormant, that points to college as a very important agent of political socialization. People in our, under our purview are there during their formative years, and so what happens during college actually does seem to matter. Now, the conventional wisdom is college makes you liberal. Well, that may be true on social issues. What we're finding is today, given income polarization, that's not true on economic issues. If anything, it's the reverse. College can make people conservative as well as liberal. Now, what we're doing here is shining the light on a kind of inadvertent downstream consequence of admission policies and curricular policies that many of our colleges are pursuing today, right? So schools today are admitting lots and lots of kids who come disproportionately from the top of the income distribution. It's not just the middle, it's the top. In fact, there's kind of a missing middle on college campus. If you remember one of the charts that I showed, the vast majority of students in many colleges are coming from the top 10 or 25% of the income distribution. Where is the 50th percentile? It's largely missing. It's certainly underrepresented on college campuses. So these admission policies have these unexpected downstream consequences. They're nudging students to become economically conservative adults who then support tax policies that enhance income inequality, right? We started this by saying, where do affluent adults get these distinctive conservative views on economics? Why are they focused on their narrow class interests? Well, this seems to be part of the answer. It's this inadvertent reinforcement of more narrow upper class interests that our colleges are fostering without perhaps being fully aware that they're doing so. So college, again, has these kind of wide feedback effects that create a closed cycle, a closed loop of economic policy. And so the bottom line here, there's a policy implication. The bottom line is if you want to change economic policy to make it somewhat more redistributive, to redistribute income so it's not continually concentrating more and more at the top, one of the things that you can do is change the admission policies of colleges so that we bring in the missing middle and we really encourage kids from wherever they are in the income distribution to go to four-year schools and complete them. Of course, that's going to require financial aid policy revision as well. And then the other implication here is that largely we're failing in our educational mission. What we're doing is allowing these social norms of financial gain to completely go unchecked. We may try through our curricular interventions in the classroom. If we are trying, we're not having enough of an impact. So this is, implication is to really think about what are colleges doing to foster a sense of it's not just about making bucket loads of money. Thank you.
Questions?
Tali, I'm wondering, it may just be anecdotal, but remember thinking that a large number of wealthy people consider themselves middle class. And I'm wondering on whether these affluent people are developing a sense of group identification linked to affluent rather than college graduate or wealthy. Is there a sense of identification with this category called affluent person?
That's a great question. Thank you. So we don't have data to be able to answer this right now. My expectation is that the label matters. We know that that's true for other parts of the income distribution. So many lower income people don't identify as lower income. They're not going to use that label. But there's recent work by Kathy Kramer and others suggesting that many people's politics are in fact heavily shaped by their class experiences and their class identity, but they're not using that class label. So Kathy Kramer's work suggests that they're using their geographical identities. It's rural consciousness in Wisconsin, at least. That rural consciousness is highly class inflected. So they see themselves as people on the bottom of the hierarchy. They feel that they're not listened to because they lack economic power and they lack social status. But if you ask them, so are you a lower income person, they're probably not going to say yes. I suspect there's something similar going on at the upper part of the distribution as well. So if you look at popular representations of how higher income people see themselves, they will use labels like job creators. And there's an interesting economic analysis done of the New York Times over the decades, showing that in the middle part of the 20th century, the most common word to refer to business people was capitalist. And then gradually, as the income distribution changed, we also saw change in the terminology to creative and entrepreneur. So these words, I think, make a big difference. And part of what I hope will happen in political science is more attention to what's happening among the upper part of the distribution. We need to study that part as well. We need to understand, how do people identify themselves in that part of the distribution, and why do they identify that way?
Hi, Tali. I came in maybe with 5 minutes left in your talk, so I don't know if you covered this, but I'm reacting to what you said here about college as an important agent of political socialization. So that seems right based on the description of your data, but I'm wondering if you can, if you can, I think this would just be speculation, but if you can speculate on how much of an agent it is compared to other places somebody could be socialized. Because of course somebody could be socialized, maybe in their workplace or something like that, if that's where they went other than college, or whatever else somebody's going to do with those years. And do we think that college, because of this unique income distribution they might be exposed to, is it a particularly good socializing force, or do we have any sense of that?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question too. I'm going to start answering it while I click back in the slides. So doubtless there are other settings that are very important. The workplace comes to mind. But one interesting thing we found is, so way down here we've got the local inequality in the area of the college. So this is the Gini coefficient in the county. That has a tiny effect. I would think that it would have a bigger effect than it did. So that suggests to me that we need to really think about what are the meaningful social environments for a person. The county may or may not be a meaningful social environment, as you well know from your own work. And so I think it's productive to think about, if we really think that social norms matter and that it's absorbing the social norm and being open to the social norm, then let's think about what are the communities that are relevant for that norm. The workplace may or may not be. I think we want to kind of subject those environments to a social norms-based criteria, set of criteria, like do people care about the opinion of peers in that community? Is there kind of do they care about their social rank within the community? My intuition is that that's part of why this college effect is so strong. Going back to my stylized rendition of what college life looks like. So here's this, right? There's the freshmen arriving on campus and really wanting to know what their older peers think. So if workplaces are like this, they might be as powerful or more powerful. On the other hand, if people in the workplace aren't interacting and they don't care what their peers at work think about them, maybe workplaces aren't very powerful. Or this is part of the earlier slides. If this kind of dynamic is happening around workplaces, and people are kind of displaying their wealth or their class position to their workplace peers, then yeah, workplaces might really matter. But this is the kind of stuff that I think we need to start thinking about when we predict whether an environment matters.
Tali, this is really interesting. I just had a couple of quick questions that are related. So what about family of origin norms, right? Because when you started out with that great cartoon about meritocracy worked for my grandfather and my father, and it's working for me too. And anyone that spent time around truly elite colleges, you're cognizant of the intergenerational effect of this access. You're also cognizant of the fact that many of these kids, and I know you had a high school sort of variable, come from the truly elite private schools, often sometimes boarding schools, where I bet this is not really their first cut on this type of beautified campus that stresses hyper consumerism. And so I wonder if your data speak to the sort of relatedness of, this must start in a sort of, earlier point, and it's just being reinforced a bit by another institution that is showing them what they've probably been seeing since, freshman year of high school or 8th grade.
Yeah. Those are a great set of questions that I consider to be sort of extensions of this type of framework, right? So now that we have this type of framework, we can say things like, where else does it travel? And how early on does it manifest? Does it manifest as early as high school? Does it manifest as early as middle school even? My guess is that if we're trying to understand political preferences, we need to start either really late in high school or here in college. It's worth certainly going back a step to late high school, because we know from other studies that that's when kids are just starting to think about politics. They're just starting to orient to, there's a world out there, what do I think of it? But probably most of it is happening during college. But these are all empirical questions. They would all make great research questions for future work. I should note, we're behind. Political science is behind on all of this. In sociology, there's a rebirth of the study of affluence. And I think we are positioned now, all of us, many of us in the room, people interested in behavior and interested in inequality. I think we can learn a lot from what sociologists have been doing to start understanding the politics of affluent behavior. There's a terrific sociologist at Columbia, Seamus Khan, who's done a wonderful ethnography of exactly what you've described, an elite high school. And he shows how this meritocracy idea that I showed in the cartoon, he shows how the school helps to cultivate that with this narrative of, I'm here, I'm doing well because I worked hard and I deserve it. I'm part of the meritocracy. And yet, he taught in the school, so he can say that actually a lot of students are not working very hard. And the reason why they're doing as well as they are is because they came with this huge advantage of tutors and parents who devoted hours every day to extracurriculars and so on. And so the students and the narrative around the school are not seeing the structural advantages that they've benefited from because there's this narrative that's so overwhelming about how, the reason you're here and the reason you're going to do well is because of your own talents and your own hard work.
One more question?
Tali, I just wondered how you would explain your findings and the set of results to a reporter or someone who's very excited about Bernie Sanders support among young white people.
Great question, thank you. So this actually would give pause to the emerging narrative about how today college students, white college students, are extremely liberal, so much so that they're willing to take on the machine of income inequality. I'm waiting to see what the data actually looks like, but I would be skeptical that that's a widespread phenomenon. That's not to say that there aren't a lot of very liberal, economically liberal white students. Clearly, there are bound to be. The mean response in the surveys is close to the middle of the scale, right? And there's variation. So yes, there's going to be a bunch of liberal white students. Some of them might even be exercised enough by income inequality that'll lead them to become politically active on it. But I would say let's first of all wait for the data, and then let's also keep in mind that there's this whole other part of the picture out there as well.
Just join me in thanking Tali.
Thank you very much.